The bathroom was still filled with steam when Nora's phone screen suddenly lit up on the cold marble countertop. Just one brief second, but it was enough to tear apart a marriage that had once seemed unbreakable. Ethan Vaughn stood completely still in the spacious kitchen overlooking the bay. Warm yellow light spilled across the wooden floor, reflecting a man who looked so ordinary he was easy to overlook. No imposing muscles, no display of power, just a middle-aged husband with a neatly folded shirt and a cup of coffee growing cold on the counter. Yet in the instant that message appeared and vanished, what shifted inside him was not blind jealousy or rage. It was the sudden locking into place of instinct. The same instinct that had helped him survive financial crises others never even saw coming. The message was short, sweet 502, like last time, don't let anyone see. The sender was Julian Crest. That alone was enough. Enough for Ethan to understand that what he believed was solid ground had already been hollowed out from within. He did not shout. He did not smash the glass in his hand. He placed the phone back exactly where he found it, breathed slowly, and let his face return to its familiar calm. It was the face of a man who was always underestimated, and that had always been his greatest advantage. Nora stepped out of the bathroom, hair damp, wrapped in a thin robe, smiling the way she had for 11 years. She did not see the collapse spreading quietly through the room. Ethan asked about a meeting the next day, his voice steady, his eyes on the documents on the kitchen island. Nora answered smoothly, effortlessly, without the slightest crack, a flawless performance inside her own betrayal. Somewhere deep inside, she likely believed Ethan would never notice. A man who lived among spreadsheets and risk models could not possibly understand secrets hidden in hotel rooms. If Nora had known the truth, she might have been afraid. Because Ethan Vaughn was not just a risk manager. He was hired to see what others missed, to predict collapse before systems failed. But he never brought that authority home. He let everyone believe he was safe, predictable, harmless, and harmless men were easy to lie to. When Nora said she would be working late with the event committee, Ethan nodded and even smiled. In that moment, he saw Julian Crest, the celebrated figure of coastal high society, a man accustomed to applause and control. He also saw another version of himself, a version Nora had never known. The one that did not react with emotion but with strategy. He did not think about confrontation. He did not think about divorce. In his mind, pieces were already aligning. Time, location, motive, and consequence. To the outside world, Ethan was simply a husband rinsing a coffee cup, listening to the steady sound of running water. Inside, he was building the map of a reversal no one would see coming. Nora kissed his cheek before leaving, a gesture light, quick, and empty. When the door closed behind her, Ethan stood alone in the quiet house. He did not feel like a victim. He felt armed with something rare, the truth. Somewhere in the city, Julian Crest believed he was the only one in control of this story. He did not know that from the moment that message lit up on cold stone, the balance had already begun to shift, slowly, silently, and beyond reversal. Nora walked into the hotel just as night settled over the city. And the moment the glass doors slid shut behind her, Ethan Vaughn knew that every attempt at self-reassurance he had clung to throughout the day was gone. He sat in his car half a block away, hands resting on the steering wheel without starting the engine. Seattle lit up in fragments, reflections splintering across the windshield like broken glass. In his eyes, Nora was no longer the woman he had been married to for 11 years. She moved with certainty, without hesitation, a woman who knew exactly where she was going and why. Less than an hour earlier, in the familiar kitchen, she had lied with a voice as light as breathing, saying the committee meeting might run late, adjusting her lipstick with practiced ease. Ethan had nodded, even wished her a good meeting. His first lie answered hers. Now he watched her disappear into the hotel lobby, his knuckles widening on the steering wheel. Part of him wanted to storm inside, ask for the room number, shatter everything in minutes, but Ethan understood that impulse might release pain, yet it would destroy control. Ethan Vaughn did not win by shouting. He won by waiting. He started the car and drove toward Ballard, to the old bar where he and Nora had spent their early years of marriage. The place still smelled of wood and strong liquor, still carried the illusion of permanence. He ordered bourbon neat, The glass trembled for a moment, then settled. Just like him. The bartender recognized him but asked no questions. Some nights, silence was the kindest courtesy. As Ethan drank, clarity settled in. In Nora's eyes, he was stable, predictable, safe. In Julian Crest's eyes, he was probably nothing at all. That invisibility made Ethan smile faintly in the dim light. His greatest power had always been observation. He took out his phone and called Finn Harlow, a former police officer turned private investigator, a man who owed him a favor from long ago. "I need surveillance," Ethan said, his voice low and precise. Discreet and immediate, Finn asked one question. "Who is the target?" "My wife," Ethan replied. "And Julian Crest." There was a pause. Then Finn asked if Ethan was sure he wanted to know everything. Ethan stared at his reflection in the dark glass. Calm and unfamiliar. "I already know," he said. "I just need proof." When the call ended, suspicion hardened into a campaign. Somewhere high above the city, Nora was laughing in a room that did not belong to her marriage. Ethan sat in the shadows, beginning to collect the one thing they feared most: the truth. The first photograph arrived while Ethan Vaughn was eating breakfast across from Nora, and it nearly stole the air from his lungs. Not because he was surprised, but because of how brutally exposed the truth was. On the hidden screen of his phone beneath the table, Finn had sent an image taken from a distance. Nora and Julian Crest stood inside a glass elevator, the doors not yet closed. Julian's hand rested possessively on her hip. Her fingers threaded into his hair without hesitation. Ethan chewed slowly, swallowed carefully, nodded at the right moments as Nora spoke about her schedule. The woman smiling at him across the table was not the woman in the photograph. Yet both were real. That was the first day of his double life. By day, Ethan was the attentive husband. He poured coffee, asked questions, listened as Nora talked about donors, deadlines, and difficult guests. By night, when she claimed late work or meetings with friends, he became a quiet shadow, waiting for his phone to vibrate. Photos multiplied, timestamps, receipts, locations. Finn did not merely follow them. He reconstructed their secret life with precision. Different hotels, luxury stores, elegant dinners, and worse than all of it, time. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness. 7 months. One evening, Nora stepped out of the closet wearing a deep blue dress and asked if it looked nice. Ethan did not see fabric. He saw the receipt Finn had already shown him. Paid for by Julian Crest. "You look beautiful," Ethan said, and he meant it. That realization frightened him. Even beneath betrayal, memory still pulled at him. 11 years of shared history refusing to die. He understood then that acting from pain would only make him lose. At a dinner with his colleagues, Nora charmed everyone as she always had. She remembered names, asked thoughtful questions, laughed at the right moments. They looked at Ethan like a fortunate man. He smiled, answered questions about risk assessments, while remembering the photo Finn had sent that afternoon. Nora pressed against Julian in a parking garage. On the drive home, Nora placed her hand on his thigh, her voice lowering with suggestion. Ethan's stomach tightened. The thought of those hands, those lips, touching another man made his skin crawl. He refused with an excuse about work, about preparation, about needing focus. In the passing streetlights, he caught something unexpected on her face. Not disappointment, relief. That was the silent turn. Ethan realized he had not been the center of her emotional world for a long time. That night, lying beside her in the dark, Ethan stared at the ceiling as evidence stacked itself in his mind like pieces already locked into place. 7 months, dozens of meetings, hundreds of lies, a powerful man asleep inside his own spotlight, and a husband everyone underestimated, learning how to turn pain into leverage. Ethan Vaughn was no longer thinking about ending a marriage. He was thinking about ending everything built on lies. The folder landed on the table between them with a dull thud. And in that instant, Ethan Vaughn understood this story had already grown far beyond an ordinary affair. Finn Harlow sat across from him in a cramped office above an old repair shop. Fluorescent lights revealing the tired lines of a man who had seen too much truth up close. Finn did not speak right away. He let Ethan open the folder himself, read for himself. connect the pieces on his own. It was the only way reality could truly sink in. The numbers did not scream. They whispered. Circular transfers, layered shell companies, profit reports that looked almost unreal in their perfection. Money moved like a ghost, disappearing in one place and resurfacing in another. Just enough to avoid panic, but more than enough to fund a lavish lifestyle. Julian Crest was not only sleeping with Ethan's wife, he was running a far larger game. Ethan turned each page without blinking. This was a language he understood. Risk hidden beneath confidence. Fraud wrapped in polished charts. Systems that only revealed danger to someone trained to look at the empty spaces between the figures. And the danger here was unmistakable. Finn leaned back, lowering his voice. There was an investigation underway. Quiet and unofficial. No arrests yet. No public charges. But the scrutiny was tightening. Julian was bleeding money and using new funds to cover old losses. A classic structure, but scaled large enough that when it collapsed, it would drag many people down with it. Ethan closed the folder. In his mind, the image of Nora in hotel rooms overlapped with Julian standing on stage. Praised for generosity and vision. A man building a public legacy while rotting underneath. This was the twist Ethan had not expected when he first saw the message on the kitchen counter. He thought he was dealing with a man driven by desire. Instead, he was facing a predator who fed on admiration, money, and secrecy. Driving home, Ethan left the radio off. The city slid past the windows in silence. In the kitchen, Nora stood slicing fruit, calm and domestic, asking how his day had been. Ethan told her everything was fine. And for the first time since discovering the betrayal, the word carried a different meaning. That night, while Nora slept, Ethan sat alone in his study. He opened his personal laptop and began researching. Emerald Hearts Charity Gala, guest lists, sponsors, honorees, date, location. Julian Crest's name sat at the center of it all. Honorary donor, featured benefactor, the man to be celebrated. Just beneath it was another name. Nora Vaughn, event operations manager. A slow realization settled over Ethan. The stage was already built. If Julian feared anything, it was not an angry husband acting in the shadows. He feared exposure. He feared watching admiration turn into suspicion under bright lights. He feared collapse in front of the very people he worked hardest to impress. But Ethan also knew he could not do this alone. A truth revealed by a betrayed husband could be dismissed as personal revenge. A truth confirmed by the woman standing beside Julian would become a moral verdict no one could ignore. One name surfaced in Ethan's mind: Celeste Crest. He had met her before. Quiet, composed, eyes that always seemed to be weighing something unseen. Julian's wife, the woman who stayed behind exhibitions and board meetings, never competing for attention. If Nora lived in the spotlight, Celeste had learned to survive in shadow. Ethan glanced toward the bedroom where Nora slept, unaware that the world she trusted was already cracking from the inside. He felt no blind rage now. What replaced it was heavier, clearer, responsibility. If he stayed silent, Julian would continue, with other people's money, with other women, with polished lies and smiling numbers. Ethan Vaughn shut down his laptop and turned off the light. The decision did not need words. This war would not be fought in hotel rooms or bedrooms. It would be fought on the largest stage Julian Crest had ever stepped onto. And this time, the spotlight would not protect him. Celeste Crest opened the envelope without her hands trembling. And it was that calm composure that made Ethan Vaughn realize he had chosen the right person. They sat across from each other in the museum cafe, where natural light spilled over white walls and conversation stayed politely subdued. Ethan chose a seat away from the windows, his back to the room. Celeste arrived on time, coat neatly tailored, hair pulled back, her beauty understated and unforced. When Ethan placed the thick manila envelope between them, she studied him for a moment longer than necessary. Not panic, not cheap curiosity, the guarded awareness of someone who had lived alongside secrets for a long time. Inside were 5 photographs, a glass elevator, a hotel corridor, an underground parking garage, moments captured from a distance, yet close enough to be undeniable. Julian and Nora, Intimate, repeated, impossible to explain away. Celeste examined each photograph slowly, as if reading a report she had been waiting for. When she stacked them neatly and slid them back into the envelope, a single tear fell onto the wooden table. She wiped it away immediately. Quick and precise. "I suspected something," she said quietly. "The hidden phone, the late nights, the unfamiliar cologne. I just never had proof." Ethan nodded. He did not apologize. Apologies belonged to the ones who caused pain, not the ones who revealed truth. He slid a second envelope toward her. Inside were carefully selected financial documents, circular transfers, shell companies, artificially polished reports. As Celeste read, her shoulders stiffened. This time, her composure fractured. She whispered the words almost soundlessly. "He is going to prison." In Celeste's mind, the image of her husband being praised on stage collided with memories of the man who came home late wearing confidence like armor. She had stood behind art exhibitions and charity boards believing she was helping build something meaningful. The realization of being used tightened around her chest. "Why are you showing me this?" Celeste asked, lifting her eyes, sharp and clear. "Why not just divorce your wife and let the law deal with him?" Ethan leaned back slightly. "Because the law will punish the money," he said evenly. "It will not punish the humiliation. They betrayed us and believed we were too insignificant to notice. I do not want to simply walk away. I want the truth to be seen, in the exact place he wants to be honored most." Celeste fell silent. In that pause, she weighed everything: reputation, safety, fear, and the anger she had swallowed for years. Then she spoke again, her voice lower. "The Emerald Hearts Charity Gala is in 3 weeks. Julian is the honorary donor. I have access to the presentation system." Ethan did not smile. He simply nodded. A piece moved into position. "If we do this," Celeste continued, "I do not want it to be dirty revenge. I want it clean, precise, impossible to deny." "That is the only way it works," Ethan replied. In her eyes, he saw exactly what he needed in an ally. Not recklessness, but controlled resolve. They discussed details without haste. Who had access? Who handled what? What needed protection? Celeste spoke of documents Julian had pressured her to sign. Moments when she had been deliberately kept out of decisions. Ethan listened, assembling the structure in his mind, not only to expose Julian, but to shield Celeste from being dragged down with him. As they stood to leave, Celeste paused. "My friends call me Celeste," she said. "If we are doing this together, I do not want to be Mrs. Crest anymore." Ethan met her gaze. "Ethan," he replied. Outside, wind from the bay swept across the museum steps. The city continued its rhythm, unaware that two people had just formed an agreement capable of shaking its highest circles. Elsewhere, Nora was trying on dresses for the gala, imagining lights and praise in her place at the center. Julian was signing another deal, confident everything remained under control. Neither of them knew that in the quiet of a museum cafe, the truth had been exchanged, an alliance had formed, and the countdown had begun. Ethan Vaughn walked down the steps beside Celeste Crest without another word. Some decisions carried too much weight to allow turning back. The following 3 weeks passed stretched tight as wire, and a single careless move would have been enough to bring everything crashing down. Ethan Vaughn and Celeste never met in the same place twice. A quiet cafe in the north of the city, a silent library in the afternoon, a small bakery where the scent of butter and sugar masked the smell of fear. Their conversations were brief and precise. Personal phones stayed unused. What needed to be remembered was memorized. What needed to disappear was erased. No trace was left behind. Celeste carried a thin stack of papers in her bag, copies of contracts Julian had once asked her to sign for convenience. Before, she had not read them carefully. Now, every line cut like a blade. Open clauses, shared authority, not enough to convict her, but enough to pull her down if Julian became desperate. Ethan scanned the documents quickly, identifying weak points, mapping exits. Celeste watched him and understood, perhaps for the first time, why a man like Ethan could be so easily underestimated. He did not raise his voice to take control. His power lived in precision. At the same time, Ethan lived another life at home. Nora began to change. She asked more questions. About the gala. About the guest list. About why he suddenly cared about details he had once ignored. Ethan answered with flawless calm. He listened. He nodded. He allowed her to believe everything was still safely contained. One afternoon, as Ethan and Celeste sat across from each other in a small bakery, the quiet broken only by the soft scrape of a knife behind the counter. Celeste suddenly froze. "Do not turn around," she whispered. Nora just walked in. Time slowed. Ethan did not lift his head. He reached across the table and took Celeste's hand, the movement natural enough to suggest long familiarity. When Nora turned from the counter, her eyes locked onto them. Ethan looked up, feigning surprise. "Nora, what are you doing here?" Her gaze dropped to their joined hands. Celeste stood smoothly and smiled. "Nora, it is so good to see you. Ethan was just telling me how proud he is of the work you are doing for the gala." The words landed clean and sharp. Nora smiled back, the professional mask sliding into place just fast enough to hide the panic underneath. She exchanged a few polite sentences, then hurried out, leaving her coffee behind. When the door closed, Celeste released a shaky breath. That was too close. Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, that was perfect. Now they will worry. When prey loses balance, it makes mistakes." That night, Nora came home early. Too early. She opened a bottle of wine, cooked an elaborate dinner, laughed more than usual. She touched Ethan's hand, watching him carefully. Ethan played the predictable husband, responding just enough, letting the distance widen by degrees she could not yet measure. Elsewhere in the city, Julian Crest began to lose sleep. Finn reported that Julian was withdrawing cash, moving assets, speaking to lawyers more often. A cornered animal, the most dangerous kind. Ethan called Finn from his car. Voice low, accelerated, send signals to the regulators. Anonymous, enough to force attention. Time it with the gala. Finn paused, then replied that Ethan was choosing a very large stage. Ethan watched the city lights slide across the windshield. That was the point. A few days later, Celeste called Ethan late at night, her voice rough. "Julian has started asking strange questions. He checks my phone. He asked if I have been seeing you." Ethan did not offer hollow reassurance. "Listen to me," he said. "Do not confront him. Do not react. Let him believe he still has control. We only need him to step onto the stage on schedule." When the call ended, Ethan stood alone in the dark of his study. On the desk lay the gala layout, the timeline, the equipment list. Everything was in place. There was no longer any path backward. Upstairs, Nora slept restlessly, her dreams fractured by questions she could not yet answer. In another apartment, Julian stared at the ceiling, sensing for the first time that the spotlight he loved might become a noose. Ethan Vaughn closed the final folder. He felt no triumph, only the heavy stillness of a man who had chosen to see something through to the end. When truth is placed at the right moment, it does not need to shout. It detonates on its own. The stranger appeared in the underground parking garage as if he had been formed from concrete shadows and the smell of oil itself. Ethan Vaughn had just closed his car door when he heard footsteps stop behind him. Not rushed, not hesitant, close enough to register as a threat. When Ethan turned, the man stood in his path. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the flat, deadened eyes of someone accustomed to solving problems for money. "Mr. Vaughn," the man said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." Ethan did not step back. He did not step forward. He simply observed. The man's hands were visible, relaxed, a stance practiced to avoid drawing attention while still asserting dominance. "Who sent you?" Ethan asked. The man pressed his lips together, as if the answer were merely procedural. "Julian Crest. He wants things to stay smooth." Ethan let out a quiet laugh. Not mocking, not nervous, just the confirmation that the trap had finally been felt. "What is he offering?" A number was spoken, small compared to what Julian had already taken, but large enough to make many people change sides. Payment for silence, for looking the other way. Ethan shook his head. He stepped aside, but the man mirrored the movement, placing a hand against Ethan's chest. Pressure light, testing. In that instant, many outcomes were possible. Ethan lowered his gaze to the hand. then lifted his eyes again, calm to the point of being unsettling. "Go back and tell your employer this," Ethan said evenly. "If anything happens to me, if I slip on a stair or have an unfortunate accident, the full file goes to the financial regulators, the police, and at least 3 major newsrooms. Not rumors, not accusations, evidence, names, money trails, timelines, everything." The man blinked, just once, but it was enough. The hand withdrew. He took a step back. "You are very confident," he said. "I am just doing my job." "So am I," Ethan replied, opening his car door. The car rolled out of the garage, leaving behind a man who would now have to report that the target had not reacted as expected. Somewhere else in the city, Julian Crest felt it immediately. A subtle shift in the air. The sensation of a game slipping out of familiar control. Finn called Ethan later that night. "Julian is pulling cash, moving assets, liquidating positions. He is preparing an exit." Ethan looked out the window of his study. The city glowing and indifferent. "Push it faster," he said. "Send more data. Make it impossible to ignore." Finn hesitated. "You are cornering him. You know what that means." Ethan did. A cornered animal makes reckless moves. But he also knew that time favored Julian if it was allowed to pass. This game could not be stretched out. Celeste called shortly after, her voice unsteady. "Julian is asking strange questions. He checks my phone. He is asking whether I have seen you." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. "Listen to me," he said. "Do not confront him. Do not react. Let him believe he still controls the board. We only need him to step onto the stage on schedule." There was a long pause. Then Celeste exhaled. "I trust you." At the same time, in the house overlooking the bay, Nora began to lose sleep. She questioned Ethan more frequently. About Julian, about work, questions that circled without landing. Ethan answered simply, without reassurance, without distance. His calm unsettled her more than anger ever could. The night before the gala, Ethan sat alone in his car, studying the timeline displayed on his tablet. Every piece was in place. Regulators had been alerted. Data had been locked. There was no way back. He thought of the first moment he had seen the message on the kitchen counter. The feeling of being underestimated. The man who had tried to buy his silence with money. Ethan Vaughn did not seek revenge with fists. He sought an ending that could not be reversed. Once truth stands under bright lights, no payment is large enough to bury it again. Somewhere in the city, Julian Crest stared into a mirror, straightening his tie, telling himself everything was still under control. He did not know that the trap had already closed. Silently, without warning. All that remained was the moment it would tighten. The Denver Charity Gala arrived wrapped in spectacle. And for Julian Crest, it was supposed to be another night of applause. Another carefully staged reminder of who he was in the eyes of the city. Limousines lined the curb outside the museum. Cameras flashed. Laughter floated through the cold evening air. Wealth and influence moved easily across the red carpet, trading smiles that carried no real warmth. Ethan Vaughn arrived without spectacle. No driver, no entourage, just a quiet confidence that drew no attention and yet missed nothing. 2 blocks away, Celeste waited, her phone dark in her hand, her breathing steady. When she stepped into the passenger seat, Ethan almost did not recognize her. Gone was the restrained elegance she usually wore like armor. Tonight she chose visibility. A deep red gown, bold and unapologetic, her hair loose, her posture unyielding. This night was not about blending in. It was about being seen. As they walked toward the entrance together, whispers rippled outward. People slowed, heads turned. Celeste Crest on the arm of Ethan Vaughn. Not Julian Crest, not the expected image. Inside the grand hall, conversations faltered, curiosity sharpening into unease. Somewhere near the center of the room, Nora stood directing staff with professional precision, clipboard in hand. When she looked up and saw them, the color drained from her face. Across the room, Julian was holding court, laughing too loudly, surrounded by men who had money invested and trust extended. He noticed Celeste first. Confusion flickered. Then he saw Ethan. The smile froze before reassembling itself into something forced and brittle. Celeste squeezed Ethan's arm. "Ready," she whispered. They moved through the crowd slowly. Glasses paused mid-air. Conversations fell apart as they passed. When Julian finally stepped forward, his voice carried too much cheer. "Celeste, there you are. I was wondering where you had gone." His eyes slid to Ethan. "Calculating. And Jonathan, what a surprise." Celeste answered before Ethan could speak. "I thought I would arrive with someone whose company I genuinely enjoy." The words landed clean and sharp. Around them, men shifted uncomfortably, suddenly remembering other obligations, other conversations. Julian leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This is not the place. We should speak privately." Celeste smiled. "A slow and dangerous thing. I am tired of privacy," she said. "All those private rooms, private accounts, private lies. Let us be public for once." The announcement chimed through the hall, calling guests to their tables. Julian nodded stiffly and turned away, already sweating beneath his tailored suit. At the head table, Celeste took the seat meant for Nora. Ethan sat beside her. Nora was guided to a place across from them, her face smooth, her hands shaking just enough to betray her. Dinner unfolded like quiet warfare. Celeste laughed easily, touching Ethan's arm, leaning close, radiating ease she had never shown beside her husband. Julian drank too quickly. Nora watched, calculating, searching for an explanation that would restore control. When Nora finally leaned forward, her voice sharp and contained, she asked Ethan what he thought he was doing. Ethan met her gaze calmly. "Having dinner. The salmon is excellent." Her lips tightened. "This is humiliating." Ethan's voice dropped. "Is it? Interesting choice of word." Nora's breath caught. "What are you planning?" Ethan did not answer. He only smiled faintly. "Just wait." As the plates were cleared and the lights dimmed, Julian rose for his introduction. The practiced confidence of a man who believed the stage belonged to him. Behind him, the screen flickered to life. For a brief moment, everything looked exactly as planned. Then the image changed. The first 30 seconds passed exactly as Julian Crest expected. The screen behind him glowed with polished images, groundbreaking ceremonies, oversized donation checks, smiling handshakes frozen in perfect lighting. His voice filled the hall, confident and rehearsed, speaking about vision, responsibility, and giving back. Applause followed on cue. For a brief moment, the illusion held. Then the image shifted. A hotel entrance appeared on the screen. Time-stamped, unmistakable. Julian's voice continued over the footage. Calm and authoritative, taken from a past interview about perception and control. The audience gasped as the doors opened and Julian Crest stepped inside. Followed closely by Nora, the room rippled with whispers. Someone dropped a glass. Red wine spilled across white linen. Nora froze. Her clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered against the floor. Julian turned toward the screen, confusion flashing into panic. "Turn it off," he shouted, his voice cracking. "This is fabricated. This is a smear." The presentation did not stop. Elevator footage followed, then photographs, then financial documents sliding into view with cold precision. Account numbers, transfer paths, missing funds highlighted in clean red lines. Julian's own words continued to narrate the collapse. Phrases about strategy and managing information now twisted into confession. The hall erupted. Investors stood, shouting questions. Society patrons whispered furiously. Phones already raised, recording everything. The museum director gestured frantically toward the technical booth. But the operator did not respond. The sequence played through to the end, uninterrupted. Julian stumbled back from the podium, his face drained of color. He reached for Celeste, for anyone, but no one moved toward him. Ethan remained seated, his expression calm, almost distant. When the final image faded, the room fell into a heavy, stunned silence. Ethan rose slowly and lifted his glass. "I would like to propose a toast," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hall. "To truth, and to consequences." At that moment, the doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A line of uniformed officers entered, followed by federal agents moving with deliberate speed. Conversations died instantly. The lead agent stepped forward, her badge catching the light. "Julian Crest," she said evenly, "you are under arrest for securities fraud, wire fraud, and investment fraud." Julian tried to speak, to protest, to summon authority that no longer existed. He was silenced as handcuffs closed around his wrists. Cameras flashed, voices rose, the illusion shattered completely. Across the table, Nora broke. Tears streaked her face as she reached for Ethan's sleeve, begging him to stop this, to say it was not real, to undo what had already happened. Ethan gently removed her hand. "You made your choice," he said quietly. "Now you live with it." As Julian was led away, shouting threats and promises of lawyers, Celeste stood and slipped her arm through Ethan's. The gesture was steady, unforced. The crowd parted as they walked toward the exit, leaving chaos behind them. Outside, the night air felt sharp and clean. For the first time in months, Ethan breathed without weight pressing on his chest. Behind them, the lights of the gala burned on, illuminating nothing but the ruins of a carefully built lie. By morning, the city had chosen its side. Headlines spread faster than traffic, and while newspapers softened the language, social media showed no mercy. Everyone knew Julian Crest had been arrested at the gala, and everyone knew why. What had once been whispered behind closed doors was now spoken openly over breakfast tables and office desks. Ethan Vaughn did not read every article. He did not need to. The story no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the truth. Nora called him repeatedly. Messages followed. Apologies, explanations, desperation layered one on top of another. Ethan did not answer. Silence was no longer punishment. It was clarity. A few days later, she sent one final message asking to meet. Just once. To talk. Ethan agreed, not out of hope, but because endings deserved to be spoken aloud. They met in a quiet hotel restaurant. Nora looked smaller there, stripped of confidence and careful presentation. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes, makeup doing little to hide exhaustion. She asked him if he had already filed for divorce. Ethan told her his lawyer was preparing the papers. She nodded as if she had expected nothing else. She asked whether he intended to pursue the affair formally. Ethan explained calmly that while the state did not assign fault, conduct still mattered. If she fought him, everything would surface. If she cooperated, it would not. Nora lowered her gaze and whispered that she would not fight. She said she had made a mistake. Ethan watched her closely. 7 months is not a mistake. He replied, "It is a campaign." The words landed heavier than any raised voice. Nora tried to explain. Julian had made her feel chosen, desired, important. He had promised a future. Spoken of leaving Celeste. Spoken of love. Ethan listened without interruption. When she finished, he told her what Julian had never shared. The fraud, the collapse, the prison sentence waiting on the other side. Doubt crept across her face, followed by fear. They parted without reconciliation. Outside, Ethan felt no triumph, only the quiet certainty of a life closing and another beginning. In the weeks that followed, the investigation widened. More victims came forward. More evidence surfaced. Julian Crest's image unraveled piece by piece. Associates distanced themselves. Praise turned to denial. Ethan met Celeste occasionally, always in public, always without spectacle. They spoke about legal matters, about next steps, about rebuilding something honest from the wreckage. There was no rush. They both understood what had been broken. At home, Ethan packed away reminders of a marriage that no longer existed. Photos, letters, objects that once carried meaning but now only weight. He did not erase the past. He acknowledged it and set it down. One evening, standing alone on the balcony overlooking the bay, Ethan realized something had changed. He was no longer reacting to betrayal. He was choosing direction. Julian Crest had taken many things from him: peace, trust, time, but he had failed to take the one thing that mattered most: control. And now, control belonged to the truth. Julian Crest stood before the judge with his head lowered, and in that moment, the man who had once dominated boardrooms and charity stages understood there were no more exits left. The charges were read clearly and without emotion: securities fraud, wire fraud, investor deception, The sentence was long enough to erase any illusion of a future built on reputation alone. The restitution amount was enormous, yet meaningless, because the money was already gone. Ethan Vaughn heard the news in his quiet kitchen, the same place where everything had begun. He set his coffee down gently, not in triumph, not in anger, but with the calm acceptance of a story reaching its rightful end. Justice, he realized, did not need celebration, it needed completion. The divorce finalized shortly after. Ethan kept the house, but not the memories. He ensured Nora received enough to rebuild, but not enough to sustain the life that had fueled her choices. She left the city soon after, choosing anonymity over familiarity. The last time they spoke, she apologized. Ethan believed she was sorry, but not for the reason she claimed. She was sorry because she had gambled on the wrong man and lost everything. Celeste's life moved in a different direction. She left the penthouse that had symbolized a marriage built on appearances and relocated to a smaller, brighter space where morning light reached her desk. There, she began building something new, a foundation designed to offer legal aid to victims of financial fraud. People who had lost everything to men like Julian Crest. She no longer stood behind someone else's legacy. She built her own. Ethan supported her quietly, using his knowledge to design safeguards, structures, and oversight, not control, protection. Between them, there were no rushed promises, only trust earned slowly, with intention. One evening, standing together on Celeste's balcony as city lights flickered below, she asked a question neither of them had voiced until then. Do you think we will ever trust again? Ethan thought of betrayal, of being underestimated, of watching truth detonate under bright lights. We already do, he said, we just choose better now. Celeste turned toward him, her smile unguarded. Ethan stepped closer and kissed her, not to fill an emptiness, but to acknowledge a shared understanding, that after destruction, rebuilding was possible, stronger, cleaner, honest. Time passed. The case faded from headlines, but its impact remained. More victims came forward, more lies collapsed. Celeste's foundation found purpose and momentum. And Ethan Vaughn understood something fundamental. True power was never about dominance or fear. It was about standing upright when lies demanded silence. The storm had passed. What remained was open ground, ready for something new to grow. 6 months after the gala, Julian Crest formally pleaded guilty. The courtroom was quiet as the verdict was delivered, but the weight of it traveled far beyond those walls. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to repay $75 million. Money that no longer existed except on paper. The judge spoke of arrogance, of betrayal of public trust, of a man who believed admiration placed him above consequence. For the first time, Julian had no audience willing to applaud. By then, Ethan Vaughn's divorce was complete. He kept the house overlooking the bay, but released the life that once filled it. Nora had moved to another state to live near her sister, starting again in a city where her name carried no history. Ethan did not follow her path. Some stories end not with reconciliation, but with distance, and distance was the most honest conclusion they could reach. Celeste and Ethan continued forward together, cautiously at first, both aware of the damage betrayal leaves behind. What formed between them was not built on rescue or shared anger, but on clarity. They understood each other without needing to explain the fractures. Trust returned slowly, not as innocence, but as choice. On the anniversary of the gala, Celeste launched her foundation, a legal support project for victims of financial fraud. People who had lost savings, dignity, and years of their lives now had a place to stand. Ethan was there beside her, not in the spotlight, but exactly where he belonged. That night, over a quiet dinner, Celeste told him she could not have done it without him. Ethan answered honestly, she would have found her way regardless. Courage, he believed, only needed recognition to grow. Later, standing on the balcony of her new apartment, they looked out over a skyline no longer marked by the Crest name. Celeste leaned into Ethan and asked whether he thought trust ever fully returned after being broken. Ethan considered the question carefully. Trust does not return as it was, he said, it returns wiser. He thought of the message on the marble counter, of the moment everything cracked open. He thought of the man he had been, underestimated and overlooked, and the man he had become by choosing not to look away. Some people believe revenge should be cold. They are wrong. The greatest reckoning is not bitterness or destruction. It is truth, standing exposed under light. It is refusing to collapse when others expect silence. It is rebuilding a life so honest that lies cannot survive inside it. If you stayed until the end of this story, you already understand that power does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it waits, observes, and moves only when the moment is right. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts, reflect on the moment that stayed with you the longest, and stay with this channel for more stories where truth reshapes destiny and quiet strength changes everything. If you stayed until the very last seconds of this story, it says something important about you. You are not just drawn to drama. You care about truth, about justice, and about the moment when someone who was underestimated finally stands upright after betrayal. Stories like this are not only meant to entertain, they remind us that being betrayed is not the end, that being overlooked does not mean being defeated, and that real strength does not come from shouting or violence, but from calm resolve, clear thinking, and the courage to face reality. If this story made you pause or reflect, leave a comment and tell us which moment stayed with you the longest. A twist, a decision, or a single line that changed everything. Tap like if you believe the truth always deserves to be revealed, even when it hurts. And do not forget to subscribe if you want to continue following stories where quiet strength overcomes deception, where family and relationship drama unfold with depth and meaning, and where those who were betrayed refuse to break. This story ends here, but the journey of truth never does.